Hi, I'm Doug King with Presence, and it's my pleasure to be here in New York City today with Dr. Kurt Johnson. Dr. Johnson is the co-author of an exciting and dynamic new book called The Coming Interspiritual Age, which he co-authored with David Ord of Namaste Publishing. And Kurt, it's a real pleasure to be here and have a chance to chat with you for a minute and for our Presence audience. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
One of the things we obviously want to talk about is this coming interspiritual age, and as we get into this, I think it'd be helpful for people to understand the unique background that you personally have, because when we're looking at integral thinking, oftentimes this subject of religion and science comes up, or science and spirituality, and often there are some very conflicting points of view with that you get into in this book. So could you just give our audience a little bit of an idea of your personal background and how you come from both the science and the spirituality side?
Yeah, well, my pedigree it's an odd one actually, but maybe part of the setup here. My doctorate's in evolution, ecology, systematics, and comparative biology, and I was on the staff at the American Museum of Natural History for 25 years and doing publish or perish. So I've published at least 200 articles and 7 books in evolution and ecology. But a lot of that time I was also in the monastic life. I was in the Christian contemplative monastic life, and then moving on into the ecumenical context of the growing interfaith discussion worldwide. Ended up teaching now, along with my scientific work, at the Interfaith Seminary in New York City that's known as One Spirit. So those two backgrounds have been in tandem my whole life, and I've been privileged to know the great scientific thinkers in evolutionary biology and the great generative thinkings in the interfaith to interspirituality framework. So it's been a really it's been a very fortunate synchronicity.
It has been fortunate, because when I read the book and I looked at the ways that you had integrated all fields of thought, it was very obvious for anyone who has an understanding of spirit that you really can't separate spirit or find boundaries where spirit is not operative. And from this book, the excitement that I felt was that you were mentioning a coming interspiritual age. This is an actual, what I would consider to be, evolutionary leap in consciousness at this time. Can you give us a little bit of a feel for what led you to the writing of this book?
Well, of course, what inevitably led me there was the two fields that I had been involved with professionally. And as you said, what they have in common is inquiry. You have inquiry at the absolute depths of objective inquiry, that's what science is, and then you have inquiry at the level of subjective experience, and that entire story has been the story of spirituality and religion throughout our history. So it's obvious now, the world is moving toward a globalized and multicultural setting. We're moving out of an epoch of separation to a global civilization. And in that, there's no part of religion, no part of spirituality, no part of science, economics, social justice. All these arenas now are in play in the same ring. Nothing is separate anymore. Either globally, these things are going to merge in our understanding of who we are and where we're going. So you're right, anthropologically, then what anthropologists call these are thresholds. And we're at a threshold now at the global level that we either pull together all of our understandings and skill sets and move forward in that, as you say, integrated, integral way, or the divided path will probably lead to catastrophe, because all of our knowledge, all of our skill sets would be divided, unable to meet the challenges that we face from resource competition and global climate change and weapons of mass destruction and social justice issues, go through the whole list. So that is an evolutionary threshold, and what it involves is whether at a species level worldwide, our species Homo sapiens can start to look at each other outside of all the parochial boxes that have divided us as atheist, theist, Jew, Muslim, Christian, go through the whole list. So we're either going to meet that threshold and go to a new type of understanding of who we are, or we're going to have some very difficult times.
And this subject is so wide and so deep. You have written a number of pages, and you covered so much ground in this book. It literally was blowing my mind to see how many things you had researched and why I would so highly recommend it. And so of all the topics that I think about, one of the things that I found extremely interesting coming from the West and growing up in the traditional Abrahamic religions, which of course are very popular in the West and especially here in the United States, that as I began to look at the principles of Eastern thought and I began to see ways as presence has moved, for example, into a formless realm, if you will, that East seems to be meeting West. Can you kind of give your observations on what you see in that light?
Yeah, it's interesting that Sri Aurobindo, who was one of the great Indian sages and also, along with Gandhi, one of the great figures in Indian independence, and wrote at least as many books on sociology as he did on the religious traditions. What he said, had a great metaphor. He said, if we looked at human knowledge as a necklace, the West has all the knowledge about every individual bead, but what the East has is a sense of the string that binds them all together. So this difference between the particularity of the West, which has been the way the Western mind has made it its contribution to evolution, and then this more holistic, generalized, harmonious understanding of the Eastern mind, these are, again, coming down a convergent path. And even Aurobindo, in the later years of his life, spent most of his time writing and delegated most of the work of his religious work to others, because he said, in the long run, when modernism emerges, the Western fixation will not be enough. And all of his books were about how the Eastern holistic, generalized understanding of what binds it all together, that those would discover each other. And indeed, if you look at what's called the developmental movement in academics, and Aurobindo predicted that they would discover him eventually. Indeed, as of the early 1900s, the West discovered Aurobindo, and his understandings now are a major part of this global discussion.
Which is an amazing thing to think about in terms of what's happening with the evolution of this consciousness that's coming about, and especially in younger generations, and a lot that they're writing about that is beginning to move beyond the traditional thinking from which most of us here in the West has come. And that leads to this discussion that your book really teases out and gets into great depth about, and that is the difference between what many have perceived as an interfaith type of consciousness level, and then what you are showing as an evolutionary movement into interspiritual. Can you kind of I know this is a 400-page answer, but can you kind of give us a little bit of a brief overview of that and the key points of it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. If you look at the people who ended up naming interspirituality, they actually had moved from understanding an interfaith perspective to a trans-traditional perspective, and then onto an interspiritual perspective. And what they were basically saying was this, is that the interfaith discussion, which came after World War II, because we had become a global civilization, but we were just beginning the conversation at the global level. Interfaith is a conversation across and from fixed positions. This is my experience, this is what I believe, this is my dogmas and creeds, and I'm willing to talk to you because I do value tolerance, I value peace, and those things. But that's a different conversation than asking, what do we have so profoundly in common that we would move from a dialogue to a sense of inherent unity? So it's interesting, while science was going through what's called the Popperian revolution and then the quantum mechanics revolution in physics, it was moving toward a sense of the unity in all reality. And parallel with that, as the interspiritual, interfaith movement went toward trans-traditional spirituality, which means let's taste the experience of all these traditions, not just the ideas, but the experiences, and finding out the mutual validity and the mutual informativeness of all those experiences, then you end up landing in this place, which is really what interspirituality is, where there's a sense of what's inherently held in common. Now, what's inherently held in common is the heart, the values of love, kindness, fair play, social justice, all of the things that are the gold standard of either a healthy secular world or a healthy religious world. And the other values then that would go with the general emerging unity consciousness, that nothing is separate and everything is interconnected. So whether that's seen through a religious lens or a secular lens, it's the same challenge. It's the same threshold about whether we go forward together in a healthy way, or we remain separate and have some very difficult times.
And on that note, and kind of wrapping up this brief discussion that we have here, could you give us a feel for what your observations have been on the positive side of things, of what kind of you've seen that indicates that this unity consciousness is becoming more the imperative than the specifics about the creeds or the dogma of the specific beat on the chain?
Well, this is interesting because actually, Namaste Publishers is the original publisher of Eckhart Tolle, and everybody knows his book, A New Earth. And one of the feelings was, everyone was inspired by the vision of a new earth. That was huge. But the question was, if you actually looked at the data that's out there in trends and polls and all the different fields, is this actually happening, or was that just a book of inspiration? Now, that's why we spent a lot of time in our book with documentation, and we looked at polls on a worldwide level relative to what people say they're experiencing, what their opinions are, and we also looked at the trends that science is finding out about cognitive change. And what we basically found is it doesn't matter whether you look at opinion polls, and particularly younger people, who are looking through a very different lens, where the old boxes about ethnocentricity or religious affiliation or color or sexual preference, all those boxes are dropping away. And in statistics, even like at 60%, 70%, 80%, people worldwide are visioning a holistic and healthy future. And they're also seeing that current institutions, be they government or financial or banking, in many ways are standing in the way of those holistic directions that would serve everyone. But then the other part comes in is that if you look at what is happening in the sciences and in the study of cognitive change, brain-mind studies are basically showing that just as in the Renaissance we went to an understanding in the human mind that valued the individual, and suddenly 70 centuries of church-state totalitarianism got replaced by experiments with what's become democracy and republican forms of government. Today, we're going through a transformation that has to do with our sense of we, our sense of the collective, and what a healthy collective looks like. So the implications of what this unitive consciousness view are just, they're vast. And in every part of the human endeavor, whether it's, again, religion, science, social justice, economics, all of that is at play. So those trends seem to be undeniable. Yeah. And the question will just be simply, how will we handle those? Will we step up to handle those in a healthy way, or will we stumble along and have some troubles?
Well, obviously, this book is an extremely in-depth and really well done study, and I, again, once more, highly recommend it. Kurt, thank you so much for taking a minute to talk with me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for your work.
Absolutely.